And I'll be honest, when I moved out here when I was younger, I was a single guy, and that was a big part of it as well. And I just felt like I just fitted in very quickly, and there was just, in every way, shape or form, there was so much opportunity. It reminded me of the scene in Scarface at the beginning where Tony's talking to Manolo and he says, this town's like, talking about Miami, he says, it's like a great big pussy waiting to get fucked. And that's how I felt about Manila. Being honest, before I moved here, I was pretty much down and out. I had been DJing when I was younger, that had ran its course, and I found myself on unemployment benefit in the UK, which is not what you want to be on, and having to go to the job centre and sign on where like people are waiting for their methadone outside. And this was like 2008 when the credit crunch recession was going on. And if there's a job for you and you don't take the job, then they cut your benefits. So I was getting my benefits, which would be like, I think it was £80 a week or something like that. And one day I go there and they say, okay, we've got a job for you and you have to take the job. And the job was cleaning toilets at the Oak Mall in Greenock, which is like the most deprived place in the United Kingdom. Oh, man. The Philippine mall equivalent would be like Star Mall, but probably even worse. And that, it was kind of, sometimes you've got to, hit rock bottom to bounce back up. And that for me was a very sobering moment. And I was like, okay, there's no way I'm doing that. And I came back home and my uncle was there and he had this gambling newspaper. And I told him, like, I was obviously clearly very upset. And I told him what was wrong. And he was like, what are you doing? Get in the online gambling industry. Because that was my family business. My family were bookmakers in the UK since the olden days, kind of like Peaky Blinders on the gambling side. And he was like, get into that. And there was an advertisement in this paper that for companies that were hiring, because there wasn't really many jobs going in 2008. Everybody was firing, nobody was hiring. So I was able to talk myself into a job in a place called Guernsey, which is a crown dependency of the UK. It's like a little tax haven, equidistant to London and Paris. And I got a job there. Now, it wasn't great money. By the time I got paid, it was basically like working for minimum wage. But I had been there for all of 2 weeks, and I was in the boss's office, and he had on his wall, open Asian trading office, open trading office for the Americas. And for the Asian one, he'd put Singapore. I had been to Singapore once before, like several years earlier, but it was just like an overnight trip. So I didn't really know anything about it. But I basically kind of finessed it to him, like, oh, I know Singapore inside out. And I was a few years older than the other guys that worked there. They typically came straight out of college, out of university. And long story short, I was able to finesse my way onto the list to move to Singapore. So I was like really excited. I had friends out there. They were about to start the Grand Prix. And I was like, okay, this is going to be amazing. And then one day I got pulled into his office and he just said, look, Singapore's off. The government are concerned that we might be promoting gambling to Singaporeans. We can't do it. And I was like, what now? And he said, well, we have a location expert that's scouting the region to find if there's somewhere else we can go. And Guernsey is super boring. And I was like, young, 27 years old at the time. I just wanted to get out of there. And then one day, about a week or so later, I get called into his office and he just says, we're opening an office in Manila, Philippines. And the only thing I knew about the Philippines, what this would be 2008, was that I'd heard Emil de Marcos had shoes, because I used to collect like Air Jordans, and someone said, oh, you've got more shoes than Emil de Marcos. And I was like, who's that? And I researched her. And I knew there was a boxer from there, Manny Pacquiao, but this was really before Pacquiao. Pacquiao was big, but he wasn't the superstar he went on to be over the course of the next couple of years. So it was a country that I knew absolutely nothing about. I'd been to Asia before, to Thailand, to Malaysia, to Singapore, and I just thought, okay, it's a big Asian city. There's got to be more happening there than there is here. So I tried to kind of finesse Blag a free trip out to check out the Philippines. And he was like, no, either you go or you don't, because there's 50 guys out there in that office that will take the spot. So there and then I had to say, okay, fine, I'll move to the Philippines. And yeah, my first impressions, my first 24 hours were kind of something else.
Really? I remember you telling me the story a long time ago about your first 24 hours.
Yeah. So
can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So when I moved here, I had 20,000 pesos. That's all the money I had. 300 pounds. So I converted it into pesos. I had 20,000. I arrive at Terminal 1. This was before Terminal 3 was open. Terminal 1, not a great terminal. I go to use the bathroom. There was no toilet seat. And I asked the cleaner, I was like, why is there no toilet seat? And he's just like, sir, someone stole it. And I was like, what kind of a place is this? I walk out the door of the airport. The second I get outside, there's just people bombarding me. Just everyone's just trying to hustle me.
Yeah.
Sir, sir, sir. And I'm just like, whoa. And the heat hits you. Finally get in a taxi. And the driver just refuses to put the meter on. And then when he sees him like a big white guy, he then proceeds to show me a picture of his daughter. And he's like, sir, you're single? You like my daughter? And I was like, what is going on here? This was before they built the Skyway as well, right? So it was like the old roads. And the traffic was horrendous. I remember it was the 14th of November, when Pacquiao was fighting Cotto. And it was already Mariah Carey, All I Want for Christmas Is For You is playing on the radio. And every time we would stop at a red light, there's like people knocking on the window, begging for money. So my very, very first impression was like, I've made a terrible mistake. What have I done? And then eventually they put us up in condos in Rockwell. And eventually we turned the corner into Rockwell, and it's like palm trees and nice buildings. And I was like, okay, this is maybe not so bad after all. And there was an old, well, he'd be about my age now. There was a guy I moved over with that I was living with called Stevie, who's now passed away, rest in peace. It was him and I together. And so they put us in this condo in Rockwell, and it's really, really nice. And I see, there's the mall there and the swimming pool. And I'm like, okay, maybe I have made the right decision after all. And then I'm in my room, and I'm like, again, I'll just be completely honest. I was like, okay, I'll do a bit of research. And I Googled MILF Philippines was the first thing I Googled here. And it came up, I'll never forget, Mindanao MILF refuses to let man go. And I clicked on it. Let's just say it wasn't what I was expecting it to be. And then Stevie said to me, okay, let's go out and have a few drinks. And we're walking from Rockwell onto Calayan, and Stevie would be what you would call a sexpat. He was an older guy. He used to go to Thailand like once every year for a month. He would save up his annual leave, and he just loved that kind of way of life, if you will. And as we're walking from Rockwell to Calayan, he starts telling me about how he wants to find love and he can't have one night stands. And I'm like, okay, not really what you want to hear if you're going to the red light district kind of area. And we didn't even make it to Burgos Street. The first bar on Calayan, where they kind of called us to come in, was Ringside, which is no longer here, midget boxing bar.
Everyone knows Ringside.
Legendary spot. And the second we walk in the door, the first girl, can you swear or like say adult language in this?
Of course. Okay. You say whatever you want.
So the first hooker that lays eyes on Stevie, and he was not a good looking guy, and she's just like, say, oh, you very handsome man. And you could just see his face light up. And before I know it, I'm in the ring with the midgets refereeing them boxing. And I look over at Stevie, and he's just like tongue kissing this prostitute. And I'm just like, Stevie, what are you doing? Her mouth's a toilet. And then after about 5 minutes, he's like, right, I'm just going to go back with this girl. And I'm like, right, okay. And I just wanted to go around and see what was happening. And I walk down Burgos Street, and I can see it feels like, okay, all these girls are checking me out. And then I go into a bar for a drink, and they explain to me, they're like, they're not girls, they're ladyboys, because they're not allowed in the bars. And I'm just like, oh, Christ, what kind of a place is this? They're trying to sell me Viagra and stun guns. And, do you know what I mean? Just overload.
Yeah.
Sensory overload. Yep. And then I go back to our place that we're sharing in Rockwell, and I open the doors to the apartment, and Stevie's sitting there on the couch with this hooker doing meth, Shabu, crystal meth. And I'm just like, oh, fuck, what is going on here? And then they start running around the place like crazy, and I'm jet lagged. So in the Pacquiao fight, because obviously Vegas is behind, is like the following morning. So I finally get some sleep. And when I wake up in the morning, this girl has already had her sister's baby, and her sister's boyfriend in the place to visit by the time I wake up.
Holy cow.
And the sister's boyfriend had just got out of jail in Finland for dealing Rohypnol. His name was Artu. And the little boy was actually half Scottish, and the dad that got the mum or her sister pregnant disappeared. And they're running around the place, and I'm just like, this is not good. Yeah. And then I was like, right, I don't even want to watch the fight with them. I'm going to go to a bar and watch it. And the Saturday night, just a few hours earlier, the place was just packed. It was so chaotic and everything. And then when it was the morning of the Pacquiao fight, it's just dead. There's just no it's just complete silence. But then every bar, everywhere there's a television, there's just people around it. And honestly, it felt like it was like watching a World Cup final. Like everyone's just glued on this, and that was when it really hit home to me just how much of a hero and an icon Pacquiao was, is, and forever will be. Right? I mean, but before Pacquiao, it was Efren Reyes was probably the big, was a pool player, was probably their biggest athlete. And the thing with Pacquiao is he was certainly at that time, perhaps with the exception of Floyd Mayweather, the best, multiple division, multiple weight class champion. So to have a Filipino that was the best was, it gave me a sense of pride just watching him, and he was so humble and everything about it. And when he won the fight, everyone was just going crazy. And I was like, okay, this is, this is amazing. And then I had a friend that had been to Manila before, and he said to me, okay, there's this bar you have to go to called Cafe Havana. He said, just go and check it out. It's no longer there.
It's not Dr. Wine.
No, exactly, yeah. Cafe Havana, that's HIV Anna. And I go to Cafe Havana, and I'm sitting there, and again, same thing. All these girls are checking me out, and I'm like, okay, I didn't turn into Brad Pitt overnight, so it's kind of quite glaringly obvious that this is kind of where the freelance girls would go and the white guys go there. And it was a crazy dynamic because right next door to Cafe Havana, you had Starbucks. And the lady boys, they're not allowed in Havana because they're bad for business. So they would sit across at Starbucks trying to catch out the white guys. And it was just one of these like crazy things. And then I remember after I was just like, right, okay, I just need to go and relax kind of thing. And there was a cinema upstairs in Greenbelt 3. I was like, okay, this has been a hectic 24 hours. Let me just go to the cinema. Go to the cinema, I believe, to see The Hangover. And just as I sit down in the chair, everyone stands up and they start playing the national anthem.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone stands
about that.
Yeah. And I was just like, what kind of a place have I moved to? And yeah, that was my first 24 hours. That was 15 years ago. And I'm glad to say I'm still here 15 years later. And honestly, I love this country with all of my heart and soul.
That's funny. That takes me down memory lane.
Yeah. It was a little bit different back then. It was kind of, I don't want to say Wild West, but it was wide open.
It was definitely different for sure. And I remember everyone, all the foreigners had some crazy experience in the beginning, especially in Burgle Street.
For sure.
And then Ringside. That's probably one of the everybody knows Ringside.
Yeah.
I heard at one point they used to put these midgets into Velcro. And then you could,
that was the original. That was Hobbit House. So the original Hobbit House was in Malate. It's no longer there.
Oh, right.
They stopped doing it, I believe, in the 90s because even by Filipino standards, which isn't the most politically correct country, they were like, it was like Wolf of Wall Street. You could pay and throw them against the wall.
In case you guys don't know what I'm talking about, there was a point where you could. These midgets would be dressed in Velcro, and you can throw them against a Velcro wall.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still friends with one of them from Hobbit House today, my little friend Martin, and I would sometimes on a night out, if I had friends visit him from abroad, would just pay the Calvin, our old guy I used to work for. He was very fond of having midgets on night out, but would just pay them, and they would just come and hang out. We would take them to the club with us and have a good time.
Yeah, I remember. So you and I met in the online gambling industry.
That's right. Yeah,
we worked in the same company for a while. I was running the affiliate team there, and I think you had known Bob or Robert or Calvin or something. You came into our company and you sat with my team for a little while.
Yeah, I remember that.
We hung out for a couple of weeks or a month before I left the company.
That's right.
And so we go way back before this whole Pogo thing really blew
long
up.
before
back
Pogo.
then it was even called Pogo.
Yeah, it was under Cesar.
And so we were working for a company called Bodog, which was a US European company.
Yeah.
Trying to tap into the Asian market. Right?
That's right.
And a lot of the guys that I met right off the bat, they were all European guys, and every night would be burgos. No matter what happened, we would end up at burgos every single night. And so you're just taking me down memory lane right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a foreigner, Burgos is like a rite of passage, especially on your first night, Ringside in particular. But for me, when I moved here, again, I was 27, 28 years old, and Stevie, the guy that I'd moved with, he was very much a sexpat, but for me, it just wasn't really my thing. And it's such a big city, and there was so much going on. I was like, okay, I want to go to the real clubs.
I heard you talk about it during your comedy skit.
Sure.
So you said there's two types of foreigner. One is a sexpat.
There's expats and there's sexpats.
Can you tell us what that means?
So, yeah, there's
Go.
two types of white guys here. There's expats and there's sexpats. The sexpats, I'm sure everybody's seen, kind of the old, fat, bald, ugly white guy with the tiny little Filipina.
Yeah.
Look like they've just come straight from a casting for 90 Day Fiance, right? There's lots of those guys. And I think the reality is that in many ways, they're kind of the OG foreigners of the Philippines because, you had the US base up in Angeles and then that closed, but that industry kind of mushroomed in the aftermath. And that is just the reality of a lot of those guys would come here, especially back in the day. But again, as I was saying, for me, I was like 27, 20 years old. So I wanted to be in like the real Philippines. And I was very fortunate that my best friend had a client in Hong Kong whose wife was a Filipino celebrity. So he introduced me to her. And then she introduced me to everyone in the kind of nightclub scene. So I was very fortunate. Guys like, like Tim Yap and JM Rodriguez and all these kind of guys that kind of helped me out and kind of took me under the wing. So we'll be going to like Embassy and Encore, or Embassy, or I forgot what it was. Was it Encore rebranded to? I forget the name, but originally Embassy and a few of those kind of places. So I was very fortunate that I was able to kind of get into the kind of cool scene early on and stay away from the sexpat side of things. But yeah, not as many sexpats now. Like the city now is so much more cosmopolitan, especially if you're in BGC.
Yeah.
It's it's the growth, the development is incredible, and it's amazing to see just how much the country has developed in that regard.
You talked about kind of getting in with the cool crowd from the start, right?
Yeah.
Then don't you think that's kind of like as a foreigner coming in here, like you ever notice that you kind of get the red carpet?
Oh, absolutely.
You're like not
100%.
Right.
And I'll be honest, even more so if you're white, which is not right, but that's just that's the reality.
Yeah, and I just recently gone to your comedy skit, and you talked about white privilege.
Yeah.
Can you kind of elaborate a little bit? I couldn't say it better than you can.
Yeah,
so
I mean, it's just.
I'm sure there's a lot of foreigners who don't know what you're talking about. Most probably do by now.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's a lot of people thinking about moving back here or moving here as a foreigner.
Yeah. So I'm kind of conflicted in that regard. First of all, I think this is one of the best places in the world you can be.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I always looked at Manila, certainly back in the day, as kind of the world's best kept secret.
Yeah.
So it's like you don't want too many of them to come over. But in all honesty, I think this is one of the best places you can be. And I know this might sound a bit controversial, but I think in the Western world today, in the US and in the UK and Canada, as a straight white male, to a certain extent, you're tolerated, you're not celebrated.
Yeah.
All these DEI initiatives and things like that. And I think you should go where you are celebrated. And that very much so is the Philippines.
Now, recently, there's been a lot of kind of weird political shift in the US over the last few years.
Yeah.
Like a lot of anti-white men.
And that's exactly what I'm saying, right? So, but I think it's going to shift back now with the new administration. They're going to get rid of all those crazy DEI initiatives. But yeah, in the Philippines, like you are celebrated. People like, for me, for example, like I love Japan. Japan would probably be my favorite country in the world. But whenever I go to Japan, I'm a foreigner. I'm always on the outside. No one in Japan's ever invited me back to their house or for a party or anything like that. They're very polite and everything, but you're very much an outsider.
Yes.
Whereas from the day I moved to the Philippines, people were like, "Oh, come join us for a drink, or we're going to this party, or let's have dinner." Everyone's just very friendly, very welcoming, and they also they want to like, where are you from, what you doing. They honestly, a lot of them just presume that you're American. So if you're a white guy here, you get called Joe, as in G.I. Joe.
I lived between here and Japan recently because I've been investing in properties there.
Yeah.
And like I talk to foreigners all the time, and guys who have been there for 15 years speak perfect Japanese, but they feel like they'll never really fit in.
They're always an outsider.
Yeah, exactly. But here in the Philippines, right off the bat, like you can almost break that barrier. You're still an outsider, you're still a foreigner, but pretty quickly, they treat you almost like family.
For sure. But it's like for just one example on a slight tangent, like if you're a Japanese grandmother and one of your children has a baby with, say, a foreigner or a white person, that baby's not fully Japanese. It's seen as being
lesser. Right.
Whereas if you're a Filipino grandmother and one of your 10 grandchildren is half white, that's the mestiza. That's the one that has the picture on the wall.
Right.
That's the one that they're going to say, right, exactly, you're going to be the beauty queen and
right.
whatnot. So it's different. And I think obviously a big part of that is, simply put, is colonization from the Spanish to the American, and that influence that Filipinos grow up, everything is American. You know, all the TV shows are American, the movies are American, they're watching American sports, everything is, there's such a strong American influence, that kind of Hollywood influence, that it really, I think, you know, I don't know if I'm articulating this particularly well, but kind of puts white people on a pedestal. And you see it with everything here. Like, I remember I had a cousin come over to visit me from the UK, he's blonde hair, blue eyes. And Filipinos would just come up to her and like, can we take a picture with you, ma'am? You're so beautiful. Like, they just look at that as pure beauty. Even if you go to the mall and you want to get moisturizer or face wash, everything's whitening, and they put such a value on whitening, which I think is sad in many ways. And, you know, morena is beautiful, but the reality is here is that, you know, they do look at that as in a kind of elevated...
I mean, I didn't get that level of treatment. I mean, obviously, you got when people,
they might think you're Filipino American.
Yeah, but when they think I'm a foreigner, I still you know, get some sort of preferential treatment in some way. But like, if you're white, you're definitely
it's just on another level.
It's on another level.
I will say this: during COVID, it was touch and go for a little while, and I was a bit concerned. But I'm glad to say it's come back 100%. Yeah. During COVID was the only time you would ever be stopped, like going into the mall, like, you know, where's your mask or things like that. If you were white, before that, it's just, you would see Filipinos going and they're like searching them and everything, and you're white and you just walk straight through. And it's not right, it's not nice, but it's just
interesting.
It's the reality.
I wasn't here, so I didn't see it.
Oh, COVID here was a nightmare.
I bet.
Nightmare.
I heard.
It's the one time in the 15 years that I've lived here that I actually wished I was living back home.
Oh, yeah.
But fortunately, that insanity's gone now and it's back to normal.
Right. So you mentioned like, you know, why is that such a powerful pull? Like, how Filipino put white people on pedestal here. I thought about, okay, the cultural influences, the soft power and stuff like that. You know, some people think, oh, great, white privilege, and some Filipinos might not think that's so cool. Right?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly resentment towards that, and I think that's understandable. I think, again, a lot of it comes from colonization, and sadly, you know, a side effect of colonization you could say could be like a subservience kind of thing. If you've been a Spanish colony for 300 years and then you're an American colony and the white man's always up here, then that, you know, that the reality is that can manifest in that way, and you can combine that with the strong Western influence here, and a massive part of it as well is that Filipinos think that if you're white, you're rich. Right? Whether you're British, American, Canadian, Australian, it's just like white guy equals money.
They think if you're Filipino American, you're
same
rich
thing,
too,
right? Yeah. And that, you know, that is a big part of it as well.
Right. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, it's something that I've always kind of scratched my head about, but like it's prevalent in every Asian culture. Actually,
it is for sure, but I think it's more. If you take like Thailand, for example, Thailand was never colonized. So when white people,
I thought the Dutch had some.
Indonesia, but not Thailand.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So in Thailand, they look at white people as tourists, basically ATMs that they can milk for as much as possible. But in Thailand, like, they'll talk back. Like, if you say to a taxi driver in Thailand, or, you know, I want this or don't do this, like, they'll come back at you.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Philippines, it's like, yes, sir, okay, sir, farewell, sir, sorry, sir, right? It's a little bit different out here.
Have you ever had a situation where white privilege went against you?
Absolutely, all the time.
Like how? Can you share that?
Well, it's the same thing. Like, you're an ATM. Right. So first of all, Filipinos, or many Filipinos, think, again, if you're white, you're rich. Right. So the amount of times I've received a text message and it's just, can I ask you a favor, question mark. So it doesn't say what the favor is.
I get that
but
sometimes.
Right. Yeah. So you already know what the favor is going to be. And it's basically, can I borrow money? And sadly, from my experience, typically, most people don't really pay it back. So I would say that the downside of the white privilege is everyone's trying to hustle you, really. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Filipinos are the nicest, friendliest people in the world to your face.
Yeah.
But there are a lot, and again, this is just reality, that will, you know, try and take advantage of you or stab you in the back or whatever, you know, kind of low integrity in that regard. So there are certainly people that are trying to take advantage of you. Uh-huh. And, you know, it's another thing I talk about in my comedy, like, Utang na Laob, if you're familiar with that, is basically like the original financial gaslighting.
Oh yeah.
Of like, oh, you know, like even just like, would you be like, I call it the Ninong hustle. Like they don't even ask you if you want to be a godparent. They just tell you,
Yeah.
when the baby's born, you're going to be a godparent.
Right,
Which
right.
basically just means, right, you and all the other people with money, they know you're going to have to
Yeah.
pay for the education and all the bills and
Right.
all that kind of stuff. So there's always people trying to kind of hustle you for things and, you know, get what they can from you. So I would say that's the downside. But for me, I never really experienced it much because I was always kind of switched on to it. But there's a lot of guys, the sex pack guys that come out, they can really get milked.
Oh yeah, I bet.
Right.
No, I've seen
like
it.
Steve,
I've seen it.
So
Like,
the guy I used to live with, Steve, is a perfect example. I lived with this guy. I would see this with my own eyes. His girlfriend worked in a bar on Burgos, and there would be a bar fine that would have to be paid, and he didn't want other guys going with his girl, so he used to go to the ATM every night to pay the bar fine. And then she would say to him like, "Oh, I need, my mother needs money for her hospital bill, or my sister needs money for school, or this or that or whatever," and he's just shelling out for everyone. And that's not true for all Filipinos. Maybe it's more from a kind of Joe Logs, JG Mon kind of, you know, more working class.
Right,
but that's what they say is, you know, you don't marry the girl, you marry the family.
Yeah, I've heard that.
So that I would say would be the downside, but really it's the only one. And as long as you're switched on, I don't think you really have that much to worry about.
So tell us what's the best benefit of having white privilege here?
Just that, you know, people don't really challenge you or second guess you or anything like that. You know, if you've got your shoulders back and your head up, you just walk in, and you walk in any room, and it's like you always have a place there, kind of thing.
Right.
And it's just, this doesn't sound very nice, but it's kind of like you can basically do within reason, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Right? If you've got money, right?
Yeah, I've talked about that before. Here it's kind of like a country of no rules.
I mean,
not that people are out there being violent or anything like that.
Yeah, not so much in a bad way or anything like that. It's just like, I would never advocate for drink driving. I'm not saying it's anything I've ever done, but just if you get caught drink driving in the US or the UK,
you're fucked.
You're in trouble now.
Yeah.
If you get caught in the Philippines and it's like, yeah, there's 1,000 pesos, off you go, kind of thing, right? And that's kind of the.
It costs you 1,000 because you're white.
Yeah, exactly, right? 500, right? Yeah,
500.
So yeah, that's again, it's just kind of the reality, and it's not for everyone. I know a lot of white people that have come over here and they're very kind of like straight laced, prim and proper, and they can't adapt to the chaos and they don't like it. But if you can kind of roll with that and adapt to it, then in many ways it can become a good thing, because from a business standpoint, the ease of doing business here is not, it's a tough place to do business, particularly when establishing a business.
Yeah.
But at the same time, those difficulties, be it, you know, corruption, bureaucracy, incompetence, whatever it may be, if you can overcome that, then it can give you a bit of a moat,
right?
Because there's so many that try and fail, and if you can navigate those waters and you have the right partners and you make the right moves, then you can really set yourself up well,
right? Especially if you know the right people here.
Which again, I've always been a big believer that your network is your net worth, but nowhere is that more profound than here.
100%. You almost, even money alone won't get you there. Here, money and hard work probably won't get you there, but here. You can always say this is a country where everything is super difficult, but anything is possible.
Anything's possible. If you know the right people, all it takes is one phone call.
Right? Yeah. So what was the point in your life here in the Philippines where you decided, okay, this is home for me?
Honestly, it was almost not the first 24 hours, but it wasn't long after that.
Okay.
Just being, you know, in the UK where I'm from, the weather's terrible. And I hate cold, grey, miserable weather. Okay, it's a bit humid here, but the climate's far, far better. It's really expensive in the UK. The cost, it's a lot more expensive here now than it was 15 years ago. But the cost of living here is nowhere near as high. Again, I'll be honest, when I moved out here when I was younger, I was a single guy. And that was a big part of it as well. And I just felt like, I just fitted in very quickly. And I felt there was just, in every way, shape, or form, there was so much opportunity. It reminded me of the scene in Scarface at the beginning where Tony's talking to Manolo and he says, this town's like, talking about Miami, he says, it's like a great big pussy waiting to get fucked. And that's how I felt about Manila 15 years ago. I was like, there's opportunity here. If I can just navigate these waters, you could do it. And I just had a good life, you know, living in Rockwell in a nice place. And, you know, you've got maids and drivers and all these kind of things. And you're celebrated, you know the right people. So I've always got the best table at the club, and you can go where you want to go and do what you want to do. And I was just like, I honestly felt like it was like a cheat code. Like I've found this hidden gem, because I have friends that were living in Asia before me, in Hong Kong, Singapore, places like that. And when I told them I was going to the Philippines, they were like, what, like, why on earth would you want to go there? Because it was, especially back then, was seen as this like dirty, dangerous, seedy, just, not a good place. And I could understand why people might think that if you've never been here and you fly in for 24 hours and you don't know anyone, and you're just stuck on EDSA and then in Makati, you might think that. But when you know the right people and you're going to the right places and you adapt, I think it's one of the best places in the world to live. Like I really, really do.
That's interesting. A big pussy that's way that fucked.
Sorry for the vulgar language. It's a quote.
I can remember that.
It's a quote from Scarface. It was
that's awesome.
Years ago.
That's funny. So was it what was it like for you, like dating here in the Philippines? Was it like was it a lot more interesting for you? Like how my experience might have been a little bit more different than yours. But I know a lot of foreigners, they come here and they end up never settling down.
Yeah.
Some settle down.
And
get married and have kids and have family. And then a lot of them never settle down.
A lot of them never settle down. I'm pleased to say that I have settled down, and I have a girlfriend. We've been together for 5 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And that is the girl I'll spend the rest of my life with, and she's amazing. And
nice.
Our plans are to get married and have a family, fairly soon. But before her, I had never dated anyone seriously. For me, dating is a step before being in a relationship, right? It's kind of it's serious, and for me, I would always kind of old-fashioned in that regard, that I would date to marry. And she's the first girl that I met here that I was like, okay, this is the one, and she ticks all the boxes. Prior to that, I was just very much the kind of stereotypical single white, more expat, but you're kind of stereotypical single white guy here. And I would be lying if I didn't say that was one of the best things about living here. Like, not to blow my own trumpet, but I always did well anywhere in the world, and I came from a nightclub background, so I was always out and about and involved. But what I found is, like, if you're back home, if it's the US, UK, wherever, as a man, you need to be the instigator, right? And you need to be the one that's, trying to hit up girls and asking them out and again and again, like that, right? Whereas here, it was kind of like taking a penalty with no goalie. Especially back then when there wasn't many white guys. The reality is, if you're a white guy and you're at the club and you've got the table and the promoters and there's people, then there's a natural
just got
gravitation.
To pick whoever you want, pretty much.
Right, and the friends I had here that I still have to this day, our crew was kind of like the top white boy crew, if you will. And I was just with the right people in the right places. And
what did the top white boy crew look like? What was that experience like?
It was. You ever seen the TV show Entourage?
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah,
on steroids.
Okay, so it was pretty much like you guys were like pretty much like the celebrity of the crowd.
Not celeb, but we were very much known. I mean, again, this is going back 10, 15 years, but we were very much known in the party scene.
I remember you teaching me some Tagalog pickup lines.
I can't remember that, but
you don't remember that? So anyways, that's interesting. So the dating experience, the life experience here was great. But let's talk about business.
Sure.
You and I had some success here, right? We started working for a company. We branched off, eventually did our own thing. And then I think you ran another gambling operation for another company.
Yeah.
And now you're doing stand-up comedy.
The stand-up comedy for me, that's just a passion thing. It's just a hobby. I'm not doing it to try and make money or anything like that. That's purely just a hobby.
Well, let's talk about that real quick, because that's fun. Like, I think it takes a lot of balls to do it, right? So
it's one of the hardest things you can do, because the feedback's instantaneous.
Right.
Like, people think public speaking's difficult. Public speaking, you've just got to talk and people sit there and listen.
Right.
In comedy, they need to laugh.
Right.
And if you're telling jokes and they're not laughing and you're not getting a reaction, I mean, it's a challenging thing to do. But I thoroughly enjoy it.
What made you want to do it?
So my entire life, I've always been a huge fan of stand-up comedy. I'm very fortunate that what's widely regarded as one of the greatest comedy performances of all time was, it was called Billy and Albert. It was Billy Connolly at the Royal Albert Hall in London in July of 1986 or 87, I think it was. And I was actually there. My dad took me, we couldn't get a babysitter, so I had to go with him. So I was going to shows like that from a very young age, and very fortunate that my favorite comedians from, Frankie Boyle, Jimmy Carr, Dave Chappelle, I've seen all these guys live. And the biggest comedy festival in the world is in Edinburgh in Scotland, very close to where I'm from. So just, you grow up just around it, and I would have friends that would do comedy and going to comedy clubs and all these things. But moving to the Philippines, it was never on my radar at all, because I didn't even really know there was a comedy scene here. Like, I'll never forget one time, I was at home, I'm upstairs, and I can hear my maid just laughing hysterically downstairs. And I go downstairs to see what she's laughing at, and she's got the TV on in her room, and it was like some Filipino, it was like custard pie in the face, slipping on a banana peel, like, you know what I mean? Like, really. Yeah. And I was like, this is the comedy scene here, kind of thing. Right. So it just never really entered my mind. And then what happened was, about 6 months ago, I was at home, I had Netflix on in the background, it was on screensaver mode. And it came, because Netflix now is the home of stand-up, right? It used to be like HBO back in the day. Now all the top comedians have Netflix specials. And I had Netflix on in the background at home, and it came up like, Netflix original stand-up, and it said Mabuhay is a lie. So as soon as I saw the word Mabuhay, I'm like, okay, wait a minute, that's Filipino. So I clicked it, and it's a Filipino comedian called Red Alero, and he's one of the main guys of Comedy Manila, which is who I perform for. And it was filmed in Teatrino and Green Hills. It was all in Tagalog, so I had to, use the subtitles. But I watched it and went on his Instagram, and his Instagram was all Comedy Manila, Comedy Manila. So then I checked out the Comedy Manila page, and they have like open mics and shows, and I was just like, okay, let me just go and try this, because my girlfriend had long been saying for years, like, whenever we would, like, during COVID, for example, when we weren't going out much, we'd have like people over to our place, and I would just be, after a few drinks, just cracking jokes and standing up, and she would always be like, you could be a comedian. And I was like, okay, I'll just go and do it. And I'm pretty shameless. I don't really get nervous or anything like that. And I just tried it an open mic. I had to be stuck in traffic for like 2 hours to get to Quezon City to get 3 minutes on the mic. And it went well, and I finished, and she was like, yeah, you're basically kind of natural at it. And then since then, just been trying to do what I can, but it's challenging for me because almost all of the comedy scene here is in Tagalog. Yeah. And I know a few words, but I can't speak it fluently. So even if I'm going to, a show or an open mic, everyone else is talking Tagalog, and I don't even know what they're talking about. Right. So it's hard to get a gauge, to get a read on it. But yeah, started doing English shows a few months ago. You were at the one on Saturday, and just really, trying to do the best I can with Comedy Manila to work on that and try and grow that scene, because the reality with Tagalog is it is limited. Even only, I think 25% of the Philippines is Tagalog, right? And the only people that speak it abroad are OFWs, whereas, English is the language of the world. So if you can speak in English, and pretty much everyone in the Philippines speaks fluent English, so I think there's real potential to open that up and to grow the scene.
Yeah, I had Christy McGarry and Ro Wilson here last week on my podcast.
He was at my show recently.
Oh, was he? Okay. Yeah, you guys know each other.
Yeah, for sure.
So, we were talking about our Phil-Am experience moving here. They're both Phil-Am. I'm not, but we were just talking about here in the Philippines. One thing I love here about the Philippines is, like, you really do feel like you can be anyone you want.
100%. Like the best example I could give you there is one of my closest friends back in the UK, a guy called James Gardner, who's also a stand-up comedian. He, back in the day, would play football, but it would be like soccer. I hate to use that word. Would play Sunday league football, so just like very amateur level. Yeah. And I was watching on TV, and they started a football league here. And I told him, I was like, oh, they've started a league here. And he's like, what's it like? And I was like, fucking shite, mate. Right. And I was like, I could probably get you a game. And the coach of the top team here at the time, Global FC, was a friend of my dad's that used to play for Rangers in Glasgow, where I'm from. And James came over, and we just went to the game, spoke to Brian Reid, and he just signed my friend to play football. So my friend that had only played, like pub football on a Sunday, was now signed by the top team in the Philippines that was playing AFC, that won the championship. Like, they had a Trans World Sport doing interviews with them and all that kind of stuff. And on the back of that, he got to commentate on international football games here.
Right.
And that would never happen anywhere else. And again, this was over, about 10, 15 years ago, when it was really wide open. And if you had what we would call like a brass neck, and you just put yourself forward, you could just you could just go and do it. Like, I know white guys here that have just been like, oh, I just got into acting because they needed a white guy for a certain role or whatever, and you can just you can just do it.
Yeah, I mean, even for me, I always wanted to be a content creator. I always had something to say, but I never, really just took the step forward. And then here I was just like, well, why not give it a shot?
But it's the perfect place to do it, right? There's a young population, over 100 million people. Yeah. Everybody speaks English. It's well known. They spend more time on social media than anyone else. And if you have some kind of content that has that kind of, clickbait virality to it here, and you're asking these questions and you're on the street, I think you're in the perfect place to do it.
And the other thing is, the guys who helped me start out, they're from Ireland, actually.
Okay.
And they told me, so we were going around doing street interviews with people, and they told me in Ireland, people would think this is so cringy, they'll punch you in the face. Something like that. It's like that judgment that you get in the West.
Yeah, but you don't have that here.
You don't have that here. And that's what I try to tell people who are in America or any other country. If you're frustrated with, trying to get started, trying to get going, you feel like you can't make a difference. This is a perfect place to start out. If you're
100%,
because you get those chances here, and you're not going to get those judgment. You're not going to get that negative judgment. In fact, people kind of celebrate it. Like, they support you here.
People are happy, they're friendly, they're positive, and that environment, it's so much better.
Yeah, and that's something that people don't realize. But yeah, this is
compounded by the English language, of course, because you can communicate with people easily, right?
Yeah.
If you go to Thailand or Vietnam, it's a bit of a different story.
Exactly, and it works as well in business. I always wanted to be a tech startup guy, right? We were in the gambling space, and I was super frustrated with the gambling space. I know you were too.
Yeah.
Like in online gambling, it was more about putting out fires. If you can get past the hurdles, you were making money. But there was nothing innovative about it. No, that wasn't like. I mean, your creativity goes as far as kind of hacking the system and trying to figure out ways around
the dark arts.
Yeah. So the whole .com, the whole tech scene blew up in the States and around the world. And I felt like, shit, dude, I wondered, should I have like stayed in the US to give myself a chance to kind of ride that wave? But, instead I did it here. Mm-hmm. And when we raised our Series A, we were the biggest Series A.
That's Philippines. Match.
Yeah, at the time. Yeah. It wasn't a lot.
I remember.
It was like a measly $2.5 million, but it was the largest in the Philippines. And at the time, it was like, trying to raise funding was like trying to squeeze blood from a rock, But it was great because, I got the shot. I got to get in front of investors. There wasn't a whole lot of competition.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I love about here is for whatever reason, there's just not a lot of competition in those ways.
The one thing I would say about that, the kind of the tech world or just in general here, is there is a lot of fool's gold, meaning that there's a lot of things you think, okay, that's remarkably inefficient, that's wrong. Oh. I know that there's a better way to do it, and if I'm in the US or the UK, you can do that. But then you try and do it here, and it's like, actually, there's a good reason why it doesn't work.
And that's what, and people still to this day is like still hitting me up online, be like, oh, I want to build an MLS. Or can I get your advice? Because they know what I did in the past. And it's just like, dude, there's a good reason why it doesn't exist here. And there's a good reason why there's inefficiencies here. I think a lot of it has to do because the powers to be here,
of course, the country's controlled by about 100 families.
Right. And so they don't want this. They don't want democratization of things. They don't want efficiencies in certain areas unless they have a piece of it.
Exactly.
So that's just the way it works here.
Yeah.
Right. I kind of think of the Philippines sometimes like, if you imagine like a mafia that just got so powerful,
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, like if you look at the 1987 Constitution, when that was being written, it was basically written to protect those 100, we don't want foreigners owning businesses. We don't want foreigners owning land. We don't want these industries being opened up. There were so many things that were done to benefit them. And I think bigger picture, you would argue that could be to the detriment of the development of the country, and has caused inequalities of wealth and lack of opportunities.
But I think if you try to come in here and capitalize on a market, especially a big market, you have those in powers that you're competing with. In fact, they're pretty much monopolies, right? So the key is like what can you have an advantage here in the Philippines. And we know that, they're the number one exporters of human resources, right? The exporter in people. And then the number one or number two business processing outsource in the world. So everyone's outsourcing their work to the Philippines. And if you think about it in that way, like we had our success not because we were capturing the Philippines more. We were operating here.
We were only here because, simply put, it was the only country in the continent, and that's just changing as we speak, but it was for the longest time, the only country in the continent of Asia where online gambling was regulated and legislated for.
Right.
So that's really a big part of what brought me here and kept me here, was what I was doing. I couldn't go to Thailand or Japan or Indonesia or Singapore, any of these places, and do it because it wasn't legal. And here it was. And that was one industry which, it had its glory days. It was a bit of a gold rush back then, but there were so many challenges and issues that it eventually.
Yeah. So like back then when we first came, it was Cagayan de Oro.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Cagayan de Oro said it was a province that says we're going to legalize, we're going to allow gambling operations to operate.
It was
here.
An economic zone.
Right. So it's an economic zone. You can operate here. But what they had sort of like a few buildings in Makati, which was considered their embassy. And basically all it meant was that the police couldn't raid you, pretty much, right? Like you can operate without worry about...
So the business was licensed in Cagayan,
right?
But the reality is, especially back then, there wasn't much infrastructure there, so you couldn't really, these are companies with thousands of people and, resource heavy. You couldn't do that there. So you would have an office there that might just be, one desk.
Yeah.
And then you could have a designated satellite office, really just along Ayala Avenue. So RCBC, PBCom, Enterprise, buildings like that. And that's where these companies overnight just exploded. And anyone that's a football fan, European football, if you look at, for the longest time, the majority of the football teams in the Premier League, they were sponsored by companies.
Right.
All on that one street, Ayala Avenue. We had West Brom when we were at Bodog.
Yeah.
And it was an industry back then which was largely kind of in the shadows. There were people in the know that knew that it was happening, but people would walk past RCBC or PBCom and just think, oh, okay, it's just a normal office building. But if you went inside, there's like casinos with no customers, right? Like all the live dealer girls and all these things. But because there was only those 10 buildings, it wasn't really out there. And when it really changed was when the previous administration.
So Duterte comes into power.
Exactly.
And then
everything changed.
Access the Cagayan de Oro license, right?
Not exactly. So you had PAGCOR at the time, pre-Duterte. PAGCOR was just regulating for land-based casinos. And initially I think it was the first speech Duterte ever made as president, he said, online gambling's going to stop.
Right.
And then there was a pivot to actually, let's keep it, but let's move it under PAGCOR.
Right.
So we'll regulate it there, and then the government can generate revenue from it.
So basically the play seems obvious. Every administration changes. It's not so much that some of the let's get rid of it is more like, let's get it under our belt.
Yeah.
Right. And so this administration comes in and says, Marco says, let's ban pogos. But a lot of people think this is another, pivot to like, let's move pogo under.
No, it's not that. Like the pogo. So when it changed from CESA to PAGCOR under Duterte, you saw, if you were here at the time, you saw the fabric of the city in many ways change. There were estimated to be up to about 500,000 mainland Chinese nationals that just descended upon Manila like that. Yeah. And you had areas like Pasay that were just, cranes nonstop, everything. And not just you would walk down the street and the dentists in Chinese, the hairdressers in Chinese, the estate agents in Chinese. There was just everything. And these licensed companies could have what they called service providers under them, which basically meant that there could be way more companies employing way more people.
Right.
And the kind of harsh reality was that some of these people weren't, shall we say,
Oh man,
they weren't.
we could talk about that here.
Okay,
shoot,
they were.
You're right. I kind of, that's when I kind of stepped out of Bodog. I was doing my startup, and then I had eventually moved back to the States and started investing there. So I didn't see a lot that happened, but I do know that during that time, during the Duterte administration, like pogos really started having a bad rap.
Absolutely, because there were so many of them,
Right.
and there were a lot of issues that were occurring.
Right.
So, and again, if we're just being completely honest, not all, but there's a certain percentage of the Chinese population that looked down on the Philippines
Right.
and Filipino people, and they looked at the Philippines as, we're rich, we're making all this money, so we can do what we want.
Right.
Literally whatever we want. Now, we spoke about that earlier, but we're talking about,
Yeah.
little things like 500 pesos here or there. They were talking on a far higher scale, and you started to have lots of issues. There were kidnappings and prostitution and drugs and guns and all sorts of nefarious activity. And it would just build and build until it got to the point where it got on the radar of some politicians.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, because the simple question was, what do Filipinos gain from this?
Right.
And your average Filipino didn't gain anything from it, because these companies were almost entirely Chinese facing.
And a lot of them weren't licensed too, right?
But there was that part as well. But whether they were licensed or not, they were primarily targeting mainland China. And the online ecosystem in China is completely different, right?
Yeah.
You don't have Facebook or Google or any of these things that we use. So you need mainland Chinese nationals that understand that world. So the staffing was, for the most part, all Chinese. And then what happened was there was a perfect storm, late 2019, early 2020, when COVID was really taking off in China, and the Chinese were starting to enforce more stricter capital controls. And then COVID hit here, everything shut down. And then basically it got to the point where Chinese nationals that were found to be working in that industry were in a lot of trouble when they went back to China. Like if you're coming back from the Philippines, you've got Philippine stamps on your passport, you're getting taken in and you're getting questioned. So you then had a lot of Chinese nationals that didn't really want to be doing this work in this country. So you would have companies that they would take their passports if they weren't doing really well. Some people would get, they would basically almost kind of like being a prisoner of war kind of thing.
Yeah.
And at the same time as China was cracking down, they were making less money in China. And some of the more unscrupulous companies, they would pivot into more kind of like, like crypto love scams and things like that. So it just became a really dirty, filthy business. And these issues are just compounding. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back was the Alice Go one, the mayor, and she was a Chinese national. And when you really start to dig into it, there was so much there. So I think we have to really give credit to the current administration because they did not create this problem. They inherited it.
Right.
And it's a challenging thing to inherit because it was a massive contributor to the economy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Filipinos aren't benefiting from it. There was a very, very high social cost to it. And the Philippines was on economic grey lists because of it, many, many things. And I believe the Marcos administration made the right decision to kind of drain the swamp, if you will. And
I definitely remember in the beginning, like in the early days during the CESA period when we were in here, I remember going to the satellite offices. They're not even offices. They were like small apartments.
Yeah.
And, you'd have like 10 guys with computers there in a small apartment.
Yeah, crazy.
And then, people would rent entire houses and pack a bunch of Chinese people in there.
Yep.
And, you just think, shoot, if this was my property,
I mean, you would see it in areas like Alabang, for example. They would have signs in the gated communities like no pogos allowed, no Chinese.
Right.
Because that was the reality of what was happening.
And, and these weren't the best of the Chinese. Right. So
if we're being honest, you would say it was the worst because the business is highly illegal in China.
Right.
So any well-respected Chinese individual isn't going to go to the Philippines to work for what is in the eyes of the Chinese government
Exactly.
an illegal business. So what a lot of these companies would do, because it was quite labor intensive, they needed, thousands of people, is they would be recruiting like straight from like very rural provincial high schools basically, and you would
Yeah.
get, young, shall we say, unrefined
Yeah.
Chinese people that would be coming over here. I mean, I remember at RCBC where I used to work, you have the French embassy, the Canadian embassy, the German embassy, the
Yeah.
Australian embassy, the UN.
Yeah.
That's about almost half the building. Then the other half of the building was all pogos, and it got to the point where like the bins, they would have to put signs on the bins saying like "Don't spit in the bins." On the toilet doors, they would put signs saying
Yeah.
like "Don't squat on the toilet seats."
Right.
And you'd see like leaning footprints on the toilet seats and things like that. And it was just, it caused
No,
a
they
lot of
definitely
problems.
didn't have the best manners for sure.
Certainly
You
not.
know, like I see them spitting in the restaurants
Yeah.
and things like that. And
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and China's come a long way too. I mean, with their just kind of like their behavior and their like, in China, it's come a long way in terms of etiquette and stuff like that. But this was the worst of the Chinese. Really.
Yeah.
So, and Philippines became known for an attraction for a lot of people, kind of those type of people, not just in China, in Korea and other countries as
I mean,
well.
again, the reality of it is, and again, back then, even from a Western standpoint, you would have, if you're familiar with the term, boiler rooms.
Yeah.
Right, because so you have the BPOs, the call centers, the legitimate ones, but there were a lot of guys who would be coming over here to do boiler rooms, which for those that don't know is kind of like a Wolf of Wall Street kind of scam kind of thing. So there has always been those criminal elements here, and at the end, for those guys, it's cheap, it's English speaking, and the reality is there is corruption there, so it kind of became the perfect place for that. So there's long been these elements in this country, but again, I think the current administration are doing a fantastic job of really cleaning the country up and helping it get to where it needs to be.
I definitely don't disagree with banning pogos, even though, our kind of origins here come from that. I definitely don't disagree with it, actually, considering all that's what we know of it.
Yeah.
Right? It's definitely taking a hit on the real estate industry.
For sure.
For sure, right?
Particularly in places like Pasay.
Right. And look at how many properties were bought straight in cash from these pogos.
Well, that's the thing, is that these companies are making a lot of hard cash. That money can't stay in China, so a lot of it would come over here. And also a big part of it was, like I said, like the bigger companies, they were employing thousands of people. And these are people that don't speak English, they don't assimilate, and also they want to keep them close to them, but they would take their passports. So it would literally be, they would recruit you from China, you step off the plane, they have someone paid at immigration who's taking you through, this is in the previous administration, who's taking you through the airport. As soon as you come out of the airport, they've got the buses waiting for you, they're taking your passport, they're putting you straight on the bus, they've been reinvesting their profits into property, so they're putting the staff in properties that they own. Could be 2, 3, 4, 5 in an apartment like that. They're working you 6 days a week, and then in the one day off you're just in that property, and they know they've got your passport, so the whole time it's controlled. So the real estate side of it, a lot of that growth came from that industry, and particularly in areas like Pasay, again, perfect example.
Did you hear about Pogo Island?
I did, yeah.
What they were doing there?
Yeah, I mean,
so apparently an island off of Cavite or something. Is it Cavite? So it's an island that's totally restricted from anybody coming in there.
Yeah. It was kind of like a Pogo apartheid state.
Yeah. Anyways, so I'm not sure they're banning. So it'd be curious to see how they do clean up and ban this. Like how would you force? Because a lot of these people you don't know. A lot of these people are kind of operating under the radar, right?
So first of all, you remove the licensing, which will be done from the 31st of December. So anyone who is big, who is legitimate, they've already moved. And then from there you have, very coordinated operations between, the NBI and the PNP and PAGCOR and whatnot to really go after everyone and make an example of them and let them know that those kind of activities will no longer be tolerated in the Philippines. And again, I did very well from that business. It was very lucrative, but I think the government has made the right decision to clean it up and get rid of it.
Not to mention, a lot of these Chinese operators are going to be fearful of being extorted, right? So
that as well,
that's been happening a lot.
And then also now they can be deported back to China, and nothing scares them more than being deported back to China. So that's what you have now. You have a lot of them that are going to Cambodia. You even have some that are going underground in Malaysia or Dubai. Some are going to Eastern Europe, places like Albania and places like that. But yeah, ultimately, I think it's for the best.
Yeah, I heard Cambodia is a big one.
That place is crazy.
Yeah.
Sihanoukville, my
Have
God.
you been recently?
I haven't been recently. I've certainly been, and I mean it's the real Wild West.
Yeah, I heard. It's like what you remember in the Philippines when you first came back on steroids.
Yeah, on steroids, exactly. Yeah,
yeah, that's interesting. Oh, you and I kind of have quite an experience here in the Philippines, and I'm sure we can give a lot of advice to potentially any foreigners or any Filipino Americans who want to come back here.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give them?
For the I mean, I have a lot of Filipino American friends, and it's crazy, but their parents would grow up thinking, okay, you need to get out of the Philippines and get to America.
Yeah.
Now there's so many Filipino Americans are thinking, actually, do you know what? Maybe it's better to go back to the Philippines. I know so many Filipino Americans that have never even been to the Philippines, and that amazes me, right? Like, I'm a bit, if you don't know where you're from, you're not going to make it where you're going because you don't have the, right? So I would say to any Filipino American that hasn't been to the Philippines, come.
Yeah.
Come.
This guy right here, T, I met him, maybe a month or two ago. I was like, how long you been in the Philippines? Like, he's like, a year. I was like, have you ever been here before? He's like, no, I've never been here before. I'm like, you're from Hawaii, huh? He's like, yeah, I'm from Hawaii. For some reason, Filipino Americans have this very negative stigma.
Well, because, I mean, if you think when their parents were moving there, a lot of that was during martial law and whatnot. The country was a different place, right? America was a far better option, but now the Philippines is coming up. So I think not just from a business standpoint, but just to connect to your roots and where you're from. Yeah. I think it's a wonderful thing to go and see it. So I would say to any Filipino American, come to the Philippines. And
what about just getting a different perspective outside the Western world?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, you say outside the Western world, but the Philippines is super westernized. And
yeah.
Whenever anyone comes over here to visit me, they can't believe
the values are a little bit different, right? Like, so I would say like American, when I say that, I'm talking about like my American friends and the American values of being very independent, very, everything is work.
Yeah.
It's different, right?
Certainly different in that
Here,
regard,
the values are a little bit different when they prioritize socializing a little bit more, they prioritize their family a little bit more, those type of things, right?
Yeah.
And so
yeah, that's different. But for me, I think that's what makes America the greatest country in the world.
Yeah.
That it is all about success, and it's just work hard and make it. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it is different to life.
But having a different
life over here, So I think travel's the best form of education. Yeah. I've always been a big believer that life begins at the end of your comfort zone. So,
I think if you can live in multiple countries, why wouldn't you? Right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
If you can spend a few months here or a few months there.
Yeah, but
I mean, if you can spend a few months in the Philippines, right?
Yeah.
Even then.
So I think for Philams, definitely come over here. For any foreigner, any Westerner that perhaps isn't happy at home, or they don't see themselves being there, or they're thinking, okay, where do I want to go? Everyone talks about passport bros nowadays.
Yeah.
And people go to Bangkok or Medellin or any of these kind of places. I think the Philippines is the best place to go. First of all, it's English speaking. It's so easy to assimilate. You have everything. If you're in BGC or Makati, you have everything that you would ever want. People are really, really friendly. It's compared to back home, it's not that expensive. And again, go where you're celebrated, not where you're tolerated. For a lot of these guys back home, maybe the girls back home aren't giving them the time of day, or the statistics you see on, like, nowadays, like the average for dating is typically online.
Yeah.
And you see what I think the left swipes versus the right swipes for men are, and it's kind of like 10% of the guys are getting 90% of the women.
Your odds are definitely stacked
lower.
And
if you come over here and you want to meet a nice girl or whatever, I think you've got a far better chance. And there are negative stereotypes, the whole kind of like mail order. That's really not the case. Yes, that does exist, but
what stereotype are you talking about?
Like the kind of mail order bride, or they're just with you because you've got money. There is an element of that, but I think it's for the most part it's just not true. Like, these are just nice girls, beautiful girls, from good family values, and want to meet a nice guy. And Western guys are held in high regard out here, so Yeah, I think for foreigners, definitely come back. The one thing I would say, and this one thing that does upset me a bit, is for me the my favorite Filipinos, the best Filipinos, the people that I just have the absolute highest level of respect for are the OFWs.
Right.
They're the backbone of the country.
Yeah.
Right? They go abroad, they do jobs that other people don't want to do, and they work hard and they send the money back. And in the Western world now, there's a lot of pushback against immigration, right? They're saying, oh, look, we don't want these immigrants coming and taking our jobs, and Somalians or Afghans or whatever. No one ever speaks bad about Filipinos.
No.
Filipinos
never.
are the perfect
immigrants.
You said it, not me, but they are, right?
Yeah.
They come, they work hard, they assimilate, they're westernized, they're Christian, they don't cause trouble.
Yeah.
They're the perfect ones. And from I spend quite a lot of time in Dubai, and Dubai is OFW central.
Oh, yeah.
And when they see me, just a big white guy, they just think, okay, it's just some, British guy. There's lots of British people in Dubai. And I can spot them, just off their name tag alone. You can tell they're Filipino. You see a princess name
just
tag.
their attitude.
Right, and everything, singing and all these things. And I'll just speak, I can't speak Tagalog fluently, but I know a few words, right? And I'll just hit them with a little bit of Tagalog. And they're just straight, they're like, especially when you're white, it's just like, what? And then you tell them you live here, they don't believe you. I show them a Filipino driver's license. But where it gets a bit deeper, a bit darker is when you start to talk to them. And again, it's this Utang na Loob thing. And there are so many of the OFWs that actually don't like to come back here.
Yeah.
Reason being, they're honestly they're exploited by their families.
Right.
And as soon as they come back, everyone's got the handout and everyone wants money for this, and they're just guilting them like, oh, you need to help me with this and help me with that. And I've had countless OFWs that are just like, oh, Ate, you going back home? And they're like, oh, sir, I don't really want to go back because everyone just wants money from me and they just pressure me and the whole time, And that for me is quite sad. And it's a good thing that there are so many OFWs, but at the same time, they're respected, like, oh, we'll give them a lane at the airport or whatever, and we'll always thank them in our speeches. But I just feel like it's quite unfair the way that a lot of them are treated. But again, that's just
I would give a bit of advice for some of you guys, some of you Filipino Americans or Filipinos who want to come here, or I hear this a lot. Like you came here once, you didn't go to Manila, or you didn't go to Makati, BGC. You went straight to the province to visit your family, and everyone's asking for money.
Yeah.
I've experienced that myself. My advice is come here. Don't tell anybody. Don't tell any of your family you're here. At least one time, maybe towards the end of your trip or whatever, but at least come here and experience it all before you meet your family.
Yeah.
See what it's like, Because then once you come here and your family knows, they're going to make sure you're with them all the time. They're going to chaperone you everywhere. You're not going to be able to say no. So I think in order to get the real experience, definitely have a trip on your own.
Yeah. And also go to the beaches, because it's not the most beautiful city in the world, right? I love it, but it's right.
It's super ugly.
It's not the best, but the Philippines is a beautiful country, but the beauty is when you get to
outside.
Boracay and Palawan and Siargao and all these kind of places. Like, when I know people that have been to the Philippines and they've never been to the beaches, it's like you're missing out. Some of the best beaches in the world.
Right.
A Boracay sunset with a mojito, like you can't beat it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's just a lot of nature here, and there's a lot of underdeveloped places that you get a lot of the natural beauty here. So, yeah, 100%. Anyways, Paul, it was great to have you.
Likewise, thank you for having me.
I hope we can do this again sometime. There's
sure.
a lot of stuff that we can talk about.
Anytime.
A lot of stuff that we can unpack. We can go on and on about the gambling stuff.
Sure.
We can go on and on about just being an expat here.
Yeah.
Or a sec. You want to call it. All right, brother.
All right. Thank you so much. Great catching up.
All right. If you like the content, make sure you like and subscribe, or consider subscribing. If you have any questions, leave it in a comment for us. Paul and I would be happy to answer any of those questions.